Hey, how are you guys doing today? All right, hope you're excited to learn some on again. All right, so this is actually the first of like two lessons that we're going to ask you to do today. All right, in preparation for next class, we're actually going to work on Unit 2, Lesson 3 now. There'll be another video on Unit 2, Lesson 5 after this. Now, we've rearranged some things to kind of fit the schedule. And these are both very short lessons, and so that's one of the reasons we're combining them. And then we'll actually go Unit 2, Lesson 3, and 5 together, and then we'll come back to Lesson 4. So we had to kind of rearrange things with the way the schedule fell this week. So we're on Lesson 3 right now, Unit 2, Lesson 3, Working with Slopes. All right, so you should have this lesson out in front of you. And then, just like before, we want you to do some work here to get things going. So this is kind of a combination of a review problem and a connection piece, because Part A, find the rate of change of the table there, is something that we focused on a lot in that first unit. So hopefully you're feeling comfortable with that. So what I'd ask you to do right now, let's look at problem 1A right here, 1B, 1C, and 1D. So just this problem here at the top. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video, find the rate of change in that table, plot those points, and then think about how you can find the slope or rate of change once you graph those points, and figure out if you can find the next 2 points after 2, -1. All right, so go ahead and pause that video, turn it back on, and we'll go through this problem together. All right, so let's see how we did. So once again, hopefully you're feeling very good with tables of value after all the work that we did. So I'm going to look at my change in x's here on the left. So once again, here's a +3, a +3, and a +3. So once again, good habits. Show your work. Put some things on paper so you can visually analyze and see things. All right. Now let's look at our changes in y. I go down 2. I go down 2. I go down 2. All right, so what's our rate of change here? All right, so we have a constant of -2 to 3. All right, so very similar to what we've done before. All right, so hopefully you felt good about that, came to that answer. So now the idea is, all right, we're looking at things with the dang it approach, right? So we look at it descriptively, all right, analytically, which is equations, all right, N numerically, which is all the table, and then G is graphically, which is what we're really doing right now. All right, so let's plot those points. So -7, 5 would be right here. -4, 3 right here. -1, 1 right here, and then 2, -1 right there. So there are our 4 points, and we can see that it does create a line. And we know it should have been a line from the table values because we had that constant rate of change and no turning points. Now, let's talk about, like, where do I see the rate of change, right? So if we start here, this is how my y's are changing, right? This is how my x's are changing. So notice, if I'm going from this point to this point, I have to go down 2. So I went down 2, and then I went to the right 3, all right, which is a +3 to get to that next point. All right, so I can see that rate of change. All right, -2 to 3, -2 to 3. I can see that right here. I go down 2, I go to the right 3. I go down 2 to the right 3. So down 2 to the right 3. All right, so we can see that, all right, rate of change in our graph as well. So how can we find the rate of change when the points are graphed? We just find the change in y to the change in x. It just looks a little bit different, right? It's kind of like stair steps, right? So, all right, I go down into the over. I go down and over, down and over. All right, so we can look at that change in y to the change in x, all right, and we call that rise to run when we look at it graphically, all right? So my rise to my run, my rise to my run. All right, so now, use slope to find the next 2 points to the right of 2, -1. Well, we just want to continue that pattern, right, of down 2 to the right 3. So I want to go down 2 to the right 3. So my next point is 5, -3. And then I want to continue my pattern again. I'm going to go down 2. and then I'm going to go to the right 3. All right, and so there's my next point, which is 8, negative 5. And you can see that we could easily draw, my pen would work here. Let me try this. There we go. All right, hopefully your line looks good as well. All right, so now that we've gone through that, all right, so why don't you try 2A now? So hopefully you've seen this problem. 2A is very, very similar to this. All right, so once again, I'm going to ask you to pause that video, all right, and answer 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D, and then we'll flip it back on and see how you did. All right, so hopefully you did well on this. What I'm going to do is save a little bit of time and throw my work up here that's already finished. All right, so once again, if we look at our changes in x, we go up 1, up 1, up 1. Our y's are going up by 3, and so we have a constant of 3 over 1. All right. And then once again, if we plot those points, we can see that I go up 3 to the right 1, 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 all right, and I get to my next 2 points of 3, 5, and 4, 8. So hopefully you feel very good with this, all right? Okay, so now let's just really quick look at the back here, all right? And so what we've done here is really, all right, take what we've talked about, all right, and summarized it here for you, right? So we've talked about our table of values, correct? We've talked about the change in x. We've talked about the change in y. And we talked about how that rate of change is the ratio of the change in y to the change in x, all right? So we can see that this is just a summary of all the work that we did in our tables, right? And if that rate of change was negative 2 over 3 every time, all right, we knew we'd have a line, right? Okay, now what we're changing here is that we're going to introduce a new variable here, all right? And so when we talk about a line, we talk about slope, all right? So you'll typically hear us talk about rise over run, slope. It's a rate of change, all right? But specifically when we talk about a line, we use the variable m, all right, to designate slope, which is your change in y to your change in x. All right, so we won't write rate of change equals negative 2/3. We would write m equals negative 2/3 like this. All right, so when you see the variable m, that's representing your slope. All right, and then now this is really just a summary of what we just did, all right, on our graph, right? We can see that that change in y, all right, is the rise, okay? We can see the change in x is our run, right? And we can see that here, right? So there's the rise, that's our rise, correct? There's our change in x, that's our run. So those two things are synonymous. They mean the same things. Okay, so now, let's talk about a few details here to end this part of our work for today. All right, so now, when we talk about slope, when we talk about lines, right, the rise is positive when you go up from one point to the next point. So notice in this case, to get from this point to this point, I had to go down. So that's why it's a negative 2. All right, if I had to go up, and I'm going to go back to our previous problem here, right? So notice I had to go up to get to this point. So that's why my rise is positive, okay? So the rise is negative when you go down. Okay, the run is positive when you go to the right. And I would suggest that you always, excuse me, all right, all right. I would suggest, maybe I didn't have enough coffee this morning. All right. I would suggest you always work left to right, and then that way your run is always positive because you'll always be going, all right, to the right to get to your next point if you do that, all right, and that makes it always positive. Now, the run could be negative if you work backwards, okay, but notice if I work backwards here, I go negative and then a positive, and that still gives me a negative rate of change and negative slope. All right, and then as always, like we've talked about, simplify your ratio each time, all right, and keep in mind your rules for the negative, right? So if you have one negative, the whole thing is negative. If you have two negatives, right, the whole thing is positive. All right, so that's all we have for our working with slope lesson. So you have two or 2 or 3 more things to do to wrap up your work this afternoon, this evening when you're doing this. So the first thing that you need to do now is go ahead and turn the video off and do your Unit 2 Lesson 3 video check-in. Let us know if you understood this topic. And then you need to move on and do your Unit 2 Lesson 5 video and video check-in. So thank you for participating. Hopefully you're working really hard. If you have questions, remember you can always contact us, talk to us. Make sure you list those down as you work through, ask those questions in class. All right, my friends, I'll see you in a couple of minutes.